Okay, so Warrington, welcome to Nyckelfiken, which actually is sort of a translation from your sober curious. It's Swedish Nyckelfiken. It's really great to have you here to tell us more about what you've been doing. So I guess we'll just jump right into it. Tell us a little bit about sober curious. What is that and how it started?
So sober curious is a term that I coined about 6 years ago now, 2016. So maybe a little longer, 7 years. I needed a term to describe what at the time was my own evolving relationship with alcohol. For a few years, even before that, I had been experimenting with taking longer and longer periods of not drinking. I knew that I was drinking too much for me. But my drinking didn't look like what we think of as problem drinking. So when I went to check out an AA 12-step program, I didn't see my story there. I didn't hear my experiences. And so I was sort of on my own in a way, just trying to figure out how I could change my relationship to alcohol, the role that alcohol played in my life, the role that I wanted it to play in my life. And I began asking lots of questions. And that questioning or that curiosity is what I came to term sober curious. So to be sober curious really just means to question any expectation, any impulse, or any invitation to drink alcohol. Many of us live in cultures where drinking is the norm. So to decide not to drink or to question whether you want to continue drinking in the way that you have can be very confronting. And there are not very many avenues to explore what that might look like for you besides traditional recovery programs. But those recovery programs are not appropriate for everybody who perceives alcohol to be a problem on some level for them. So sober curious is very open-ended. It's very individualistic. And it's very non-judgmental. It doesn't come with any labels. There are no specific outcomes or goals. It's just about giving yourself permission to get curious about your relationship with alcohol and the role that alcohol has in your life.
And your book was released in 2018, Sober Curious. What happened after that? How did it evolve?
Well, yes, it came out on December 31st, 2018, so almost 2019. I can't believe it's 5 years already, but the book came out. I had been hosting events in New York City, where I'm based, for about 2 years before that, where I would have panel discussions and group meditations and dance parties and all sorts of activations for people to explore living sober curious. And after the book came out, which coincided with me launching my podcast, the movement, and I'm going to call it a movement because that sort of feels like what it has become, just took off and really hasn't stopped growing since then. I found a study recently that showed that 1 in 4 Americans now is familiar with the term sober curious. And we have seen numbers of people participating in activations like Dry January and Sober October, just increasing massively, skyrocketing since then. So I think this term, sober curious, it spoke to a lot of people who were maybe what we call gray area drinkers. Their drinking hadn't got so bad that they had ever found themselves in a rock bottom or in a situation where they knew they had to stop, or that alcohol was endangering them or interfering with their lives in a significant way. But people who were aware on some level that the way they were drinking was not healthy for them. They weren't enjoying it as much as maybe they used to. And they were questioning their drinking on a deep level. So I think that term, sober curious, gave permission to a lot of these gray area drinkers to actually address these questions and ask themselves, you know, what role do I want alcohol to have in my life? Do I need to change my drinking? What would that look like? What tools are available to me? Who else could I join with on this path? So yeah, it's been incredible to see so many people all around the world actually embrace the idea of being sober curious.
So, I mean, for you, how difficult was it for you to make that sort of change, that transition? I know you were in in the media industry, and I mean, there's a lot of parties. It's sort of embroidered in the whole culture. Drinking is a huge part of it, whether you like it or not. How was that for you? Was it a difficult transition to make?
I mean, alcohol is embedded in many industries, it's embedded in culture to such an extent that choosing not to drink, like I said, can be very confronting. It really means facing a lot of scrutiny from other people, a lot of questions about why you're making this change, confronting a lot of cravings, or sort of, well, not even cravings, but just urges, I suppose, to drink, perhaps in situations where you are just very used to it. It's so habitual. How has it been for me? It has been a long and slow and very enlightening path. It was around 10, 11 years ago that I first started asking questions about my drinking. And at this stage in my life, I actually can't remember the last time I drank alcohol. At this stage in my life, I have no desire to drink. I never think about drinking. I never think about alcohol. Alcohol has no place in my life. Now, this is not a goal that I set for myself. It's just where I have arrived after 10 years of sober curiosity and honest self-inquiry about whether or not alcohol is serving me on every level. What I discovered through the process of being sober curious and giving myself permission along the way to slip up and do experiments and, have a drink if I wanted to, not have a drink if I wanted to, and kind of go backwards and forwards with it and just use it all as information and experimentation. I've arrived at a place where I know that alcohol really has no place in my life. I don't need it for anything. I don't even really enjoy the feeling of alcohol anymore. And like I said, this is not somewhere I planned to get to. It's not somewhere I expected to get to. And it's not a prescription for anybody else who is sober curious. Like I said, there's no rules or no specific outcome. For me, I have discovered that my healthiest relationship with alcohol is not to drink alcohol. It's not something that I need in my life. So this is where I am today.
How were the reactions from people today? Obviously, I mean, you've written books, you had this podcast, you have all these conversations. But I mean, in the beginning, did you feel the need to sort of explain to people why you wouldn't drink? Did people ask why you didn't drink? I mean, was it a big deal?
Yes, to an extent. Although, interestingly for me, getting serious about questioning my drinking and stepping outside of the dominant drinking culture to give myself perspective on how I was drinking, it coincided with moving from London, where I'm from, to New York. And so immediately I was in a new social setting. So I was meeting people for the first time as somebody who often didn't drink alcohol. Whereas in London, a lot of my social life, in fact, my whole social life revolved around alcohol. So it was times when I would go back to London and see my old friends that I would get the most questions about it. And I suppose I just decided to be honest with people and just say, I don't think this is really serving me anymore. I'm taking a break. I wasn't met with too much judgment or criticism. People were very understanding. And I think that actually reflects the fact that I was just honest and upfront about why I was doing this. I'm very grateful to my friends for allowing me to experiment and for letting me do what I needed to do and for not making me feel guilty or like I was being boring or to not make it a comment on their drinking. Sometimes that can be an issue too. We can feel like us choosing not to drink in a group where we're used to everybody drinking, suddenly everybody else is much more aware of how much they are drinking, and that can bring up feelings of discomfort, which then get projected back onto the non-drinker. The non-drinker becomes the problem in those situations. And I suppose advice for anybody who is worried about the social reactions they might get if they're choosing not to drink, the more you can understand and reaffirm to yourself why you are getting sober curious, why you were choosing to take a break from drinking, why this is important for you, and the things you want to have more of in your life potentially as a result of removing alcohol, the things you want to create space for in your life as a result of moving alcohol, the more confidently you will be able to brush off or not let those sometimes negative comments get to you. The more easy it will be for you to stay true to yourself and stay true to your path. So just to recap, get really clear about why this is important to you. Think to yourself, what if I remove alcohol from my life, even if it's just for a month, what will I have more energy for? What will I have more time for? What will I have more space for? What will be the positive benefits of taking this break from alcohol? And the more you can stay connected to those, maybe write them on a piece of paper somewhere you can see them, write them into your phone, have them somewhere you can refer back to them, the more you can stay connected to those deep positive whys for being sober curious, the easier it will be in those social situations that can sometimes feel awkward.
Do you think it helped you, the fact that you made this lifestyle change at the same point as you moved physically from one place to another, and there were huge changes in your life altogether? So, I mean, was that helpful? Do you think that is something that people could take benefit from to make this change when they make other changes as well? I mean, because often it's just change one thing, sort of.
Yes, absolutely. And I think obviously not everybody is going to have the opportunity to move to a different country and to create a different drinking life for themselves. But what it came down to was being exposed to different social groups, different activities, new people, new ideas. So when thinking about making a change like this, the honest truth is that maybe some of your social relationships, some of your friendships might not be the same if you decide not to drink. And this isn't a reflection on anybody. This doesn't make anybody a bad person. It just means that maybe you need to find some new people who share this value, who share this desire to understand their habits, their behaviors, who want to live a healthier, more productive, more energized life. And so, yes, you could start thinking about, well, if I'm removing this one habit, what new habits could I introduce into my life where I might also meet other people who have the same interests or who reflect my changing interests or changing attitude to alcohol. So for me as well, it was around that time that I started engaging in a lot more wellness practices, meditation, yoga, these sorts of things, and started moving in very different circles where people's lives didn't revolve around alcohol the same way they did in the very, as you kind of just touched on, this very hedonistic kind of media scene that I was part of in London, where drinking heavily was very much the norm. And so, yeah, thinking about new spaces you can be part of, new groups you could join, where you're going to get new influences that are supportive of you making this change could be really helpful as well.
Makes sense, because I mean, just my own experience of just changing something for nothing is often difficult. It sort of leaves a space that you sort of need to fill with something.
Yes, so I do, and I think as well, having a creative project or a hobby or a new business, a side project, something that you want to channel your interests in. Maybe it's something you've been, an idea you've been wanting to manifest or try for several years. You will have more time. And sometimes at first that time can be a bit intimidating, like you say, if there's nothing to fill it. So think, is there a project that you've been interested, or a language you want to learn, a book you want to write, something like that you could have as a focus as you start to remove this substance from your life, and you find that you have more time, you have more energy, you have more focus, you have more clarity, you probably have more confidence in yourself as well, which is a surprise side effect that many people get sober curious report. But yes, that's a really good point.
So I know you've met a lot of people through your podcast over the years that have their own experiences and their own reasons for choosing to change their lifestyle. Are there any like extra memorable moments from these meetings?
Oh, the podcasts have been so fun. With the podcast, I spoke to people from all different walks of life who have experience of sort of getting curious about their attachment to all sorts of substances and behaviors. In terms of memorable experiences, well, I suppose one overarching lesson from all of it, I suppose, is that talking about it is really helpful. Finding other people who are asking the same questions, who are on the same path, can be really helpful and really enlightening. I think this is one of the reasons why the 12-step recovery programs work so well. Having meetings with people who are in the same situation is very validating, it's very supportive. And so really, yes, just having permission through a podcast to ask people deep personal questions about their journey with this, being sober curious, was very enlightening. I'm afraid I can't tell you any one I suppose the first guest was Moby, the musician Moby. So that was exciting to interview him. He's written 2 memoirs about his own experiences with addiction, and he is in 12-step recovery. But that was a cool conversation.
So you never miss it today. You never miss having that outlet or that sort of vow on a Friday night, just to go crazy.
Sometimes I miss having that release or that automatic off switch. But I know very well the cost of that to me on a personal level. I know the cost on a physical, mental, and emotional level. And to me, the cost is not worth what I would get from that experience. So sometimes I look back and I have very fond memories about those more wild, drunken times. Of course, it was great. It was so much fun. I had a lot of fun with it. And that was part of the problem. It was just fun, right? There was no big, terrible rock bottom that meant I had to stop. But and sometimes it can make it harder to stop when you haven't had that really, really terrible rock bottom. But then I remember the hangovers too, and I remember how debilitating the after effects of my drinking became. And so for me, I would much rather, I get more joy and pleasure from having a great night's sleep on a Friday night and waking up fresh on Saturday with the whole day ahead of me, knowing I can do whatever I want, and I'm going to have the energy and the enthusiasm to go out in the world and enjoy my day.
We recommend everyone to check out your podcast. I've listened to a few episodes. Moby was one of them, and also the book. But I'm interested, do you have any other sort of books or podcasts or articles or anything that you would recommend that sort of touches this subject?
Well, I have 2 books. So Sober Curious is the original book. And then I also created something called the Sober Curious Reset, which guides people through 100 days of not drinking. And there's some writing and a little exercise every day. So for anyone who is doing Sober October, if you're really up for a challenge, you could extend it and make that the start of taking 100 days off from drinking. I chose that time scale because around 3 months is normally the time that people start to really experience the deep, deep benefits of not drinking, whilst also starting to feel less attached, like the habit starts to wear off after about 3 months. So that's another great resource. Another book called Quit Like a Woman by Holly Whitaker has been very, very popular. It talks about, our societal sort of attitudes to drinking, particularly for women. There are so many books. This Naked Mind by Annie Grace is also fantastic and was one book that I really found helpful in my own early days with getting sober curious. And Annie has a podcast too. But yes, there's a whole genre now of what is called Quit Lit. So there's plenty there for people to check out.
I thought we'd talk a little bit about your new book as well, because I know you have a new book out just this spring. Was it Women Without Kids? Mm-hmm. So please tell us a little bit about that.
So Women Without Kids came out in March this year. It's a completely different subject. I am somebody who never wanted to have children, and I always felt like this was very strange. It felt very unusual. I thought maybe there was something wrong with me. But as I reached my early 40s, I began to realize that I was surrounded by other women without kids, all for our different reasons. This is in my friend group. And then when I zoomed out, I noticed that actually the birth rate in every single country around the world is decreasing very rapidly. And that this decrease represents millions and millions of individual women making often very challenging, very emotional decisions about whether or not to have children. And so I decided this was an area for research that I really was excited to dive into and explore. And just to finish up, I mean, I think the connection actually between these two books for me is that both not having children and not drinking alcohol are very outsider paths. They require a lot of courage, a lot of self-belief. They will be subject to a lot of other people's opinions and projections and prejudices. And so the link between the two books for me is about, yes, staying confident and true to yourself, knowing your own reasons for living the life that you're living and making the choices that you're making, and staying true to yourself in those situations. So thanks for asking.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because I find it interesting. Just it's two subjects that are very present in a lot of people's lives, but it's also two subjects that are difficult talking about. Do you think it's sort of we've come to a point where we're starting to get comfortable talking about these things, or are we just forced to do it? I mean,
I think we are. I think I've always been drawn to talking about taboo subjects, because like I touched on when talking about the podcast, I've discovered that having conversations about our deep psychological sort of difficulties, I suppose, or the deeper parts of our experience can just be so validating and helpful and healing. And we don't always have to do that in a therapist's office. We can do that with our friends, with our families, if we give ourselves permission to talk about the things that people might think of as too difficult or too sensitive. We're human beings. We're designed to have these conversations. And actually, removing alcohol from my life helped me get so much more confident about saying what I need to say. I think it's because for so long I had outsourced my confidence to alcohol. Removing alcohol made me realize how often I didn't say what I needed to say and how difficult and frightening it was in some situations to have a hard conversation or to assert a need or to express myself in a true way. And having to learn to do all of those things without alcohol has made me so much more confident about having hard conversations and speaking the truth and speaking my truth. So I can leave people who are entering sober October with that as well. At first, it can feel very scary to remove alcohol, especially if it is something that we've relied on to feel more confident, as so many of us do. But when you remove it and you learn real confidence, that really comes from inside of you, that radiates out to all areas of your life.
That's really great. I mean, I really want to thank you for joining us at Nyckelfiken, Warrington, and recommend everyone to check out your books and your podcast and just take some of these really wise words into Sober October here. So thank you for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you for having me.